And I would like to move to the panel 1 now, inviting our dear president, Mrs. Maud Watelet. Thank you very much. Over to you, Maud, and thank you for everything.
Madam Ambassador, Mr. Secretary, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really happy this morning to, after this presentation of the rebranding, introduce the first panel. It's a panel on the state of play of funding for private sector-driven energy access to achieve SDG 7. We are now past the midpoint of the 2030 agenda, and the numbers tell a sobering story. Over 600 million people still lack access to electricity, and progress remains too slow. The financing gap to achieve SDG 7 remains vast, estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars annually, much of it concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. The question is not whether the private sector has a role to play. It does, and it must. But the question is what it takes to unlock investment at the speed and scale required. This means the right policy environments, the right de-risking instruments, and the right partnerships between public and private actors. This is what our panel will explore. So today we have assembled a remarkable group of people, investors, developers, development partners, and policymakers who represent the spectrum of what it takes to move capital into energy access. So please allow me to invite on stage our panelists. First, Mrs. Helene Demaegdt, who is CEO and co-founder of Gaia Impact, an investment fund dedicated to energy access. Second, Mr. Stéphane Tromilin, who leads the access to energy strategy at Schneider Electric, being one of the most active corporate players in the field. Mr. Engineer Isaac Kiva, who is the Secretary for Renewable Energy at Kenya's Ministry of Energy and Petroleum. He is the host country voice in this conversation and bringing the perspective of a government that is at the forefront of energy transition in Africa. Mr. Don Purka is lead investment officer at the very important IFC M300 initiative, so bringing the perspective of the leading DFI. Mr. Mateo Salomon of UNDP, head of climate change mitigation. Mr. Edward Claassen, who is head of the regional hub for East Africa at the EIB. And last but not least, Mrs. Camille Andre-Bataille, Vice President of ANKA, and also a leading voice for the decentralized renewable energy sector with ANKA. So let's start. We initially had 65 minutes, Mr. CEO. I don't know what my timing is. So Helene, first, as an impact investor focused on energy access, what are the trends that you currently see in how capital is being deployed? What are the type of project, investment structure that you think are attracting the most interest?
thank you very much, and thank you again for this great invitation, great moment to all gather, since we are pursuing the same goals. So thanks again. I'm very happy to be here with you today. So I know we have to be short and straight to the point. So I would like to highlight just 4 trends. First of all, the rise of blended finance as a dominant structure. We are a private impact fund, but what we see is the increasing use of concessional capitals, guarantees, first loss is really unlocking private capital. So this is key. Second trend is, according to me, is the increasing interest that has been going on for a few years now to productive uses of energy in order to improve demand predictability and revenue per users. Most of the projects, I feel, move from social service to cash flow generating assets. It's a different mindset. Capital is also, the third point would be that capital is concentrating in fewer, larger platform plays. Investors often prefer aggregation of models, regional scale, and what we see, larger tickets also. The fourth trend for me is a strong investor appetite for CNI IPP projects. It's a trend that David himself underlined. The growth in corporate PPAs in the mining sector, telecom, data center, and also willing multi-buyer models. So I think that what investors like is credit-worthy off-takers, larger ticket size, and faster scalability versus retail energy access.
Stéphane, on your side, as a major private sector actor, Schneider is not only developing and a provider for the sector, but also an investor. How do you assess the current enabling environments and for this investment and development in the space? And what do you think should be changed to enable more investments?
Thanks, Maud. So first, I think that what we need to keep in mind is that despite the equipment cost decrease, the affordability gap remains for the underserved communities. So consequently, we still need to partially subsidize the equipment or connection cost. These subsidies shall be compared to grid extension costs and are often the least cost options and justify so the relevance of public contribution, supported or not by a development bank. So that's a really key point for us. Second, public tenders are and will remain an important part of the equation, but fostering the participation of private sector through result-based finance seems to us the best option to minimize the financial effort from the public side. And it's also a good way to allow for more innovative solution, as the technical specification do not need to be as prescriptive as a classic tender. So the added value of development banks in supporting governments, in setting up conducive market conditions to do so, proved to be really instrumental. And I think that's really something that should be pursued. To alleviate even further the burden of sovereign budget, teaming up with philanthropy is also a way that should be definitely explored further. We participated in really impactful success stories in emerging countries, such as the Selco Foundation program targeting solar health centers in India, for example. My third point, and as you said, Helene, targeting only domestic lighting and basing charging appliances may not be a game changer in the economic development of local communities. So enabling productive use should be systematically sought. So that's why we consider that result-based finance should consistently encompass productive use such as small-scale agro-businesses like cassava crushing or oil expelling, for example. So if I've got 1 minute more, maybe two key challenges we faced, both as technology partner and impact investor. The first one is the lack of sufficiently qualified workers to ensure project implementation and maintenance. So on that matter, Schneider Electric initiated an educational program with both public and private institutions. We trained already more than 1 million people worldwide so far, but the needs remain huge, and that should be definitely addressed. And the second is a limited number of companies being structured enough to make it to the fundraising stage. So we all know that the minimum ticket size and the high transaction cost, even for impact investors, is a hurdle which is not easy for early developers. So we think that upstream support is fundamental in making more champions emerge. So that's why we decided to team up with EDP to launch the EDGE Transition Program, which aims at supporting entrepreneurs in the initial phases of their development. So we are currently opening this initiative to additional partners. So if your institution may be interested in, do not hesitate to reach out during the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Stéphane. So the call for application to join forces with Schneider and EDP is launched. We've heard important words like affordability, concessional capital, having least cost options. Mr. Kiva, as the representative of Kenya, Kenya has made significant strides in expanding electricity access and renewable energy, positioning yourself as a regional leader. How do you see the current funding landscape here? And what role is the private sector and the private capital playing in driving this progress towards SDG 7?
Thank you very much, and I also say good morning to all of us. David, I like the name change from ARE to ARE, and now on Renewable. Very nice change there, without affecting your banking issues and other things, because the name is the same, but the philosophy is different. But to your question, yes, and as the minister did say in his address, Kenya has very huge ambitions of reaching universal access by 2030, and not only access, but also to make sure that that electricity does some meaningful work. So we're looking forward to socio-economic development, increase in demand, green industrialization. So we are, even after getting access to people, we'll always want to enhance that power to the people so that it can be able to drive socio-economic development. And we have been able to do a lot of accelerated electrification, coming from 29% in 2013 to the current 75%. Much of it has been from two sources. One is the public sources, concessional financing, but also from private sector, especially on off-grid electrification, mini-grids, and solar home system. And as we now go to universal access, the landscape in financing is going to change, and change dramatically. And we are working on a space where the fiscal space in the government exchequer is dwindling. So we have to go out and look for financing from the private sector. So what we have now done is to concentrate much of the public financing to areas which are more deserving in terms of maybe they are risky and the private sector cannot go there. And we have been doing a lot of rural electrification from public financing. That is the grid extension. Also the areas which are hard to de-risk, like geothermal, be doing early risk mitigation with public financing. And also previously, before today, transmission has been largely by public financing. But moving forward now, we want to see how to accelerate private financing even in transmission area. And already we have 2 lines which are going to be constructed through PPP, and we have also enhanced our interaction in that area. We have a transaction advisory service who have been advertised to support us in preparing some other 5 lines or so for private financing. And then looking at power generation, we are more or less focusing almost fully on private financing, and that's how we want to do our geothermals coming in. Only a bit of it is going to be done by Kengen. We think it's an area now we can bring in the private sector after de-risking. A lot of our solar and wind power projects are going to be done by a private sector, and we have instruments which we have done to be able to attract them to do that. And then coming now to off-grid electrification, out of the 75%, about 10 to 12% of that is actually off-grid electrification. And this is an area where we have been seeing a lot of private sector moving in that area. And our vision as a government is to continue to support the private sector to continue. We are going to maintain the tax exemptions for solar home systems so that rural communities can be able to afford those equipments. The other area is productive use of electricity. We want to encourage the private sector to also go into that space so that the energy and electricity which reaches the people can then be able to do meaningful work for them. And so we are looking forward to really attract private sector. We can't do without private sector. Our journey is going to be slow. We will not be able to achieve our commitments, and therefore we are trained our eyes and our focus to be able to make sure that private sector have an entry point and they can be able to come and invest in the energy sector in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kiva. Turning to you, Don, M300. So there are different initiatives in this context, like Zafiri, Dares, and Ascent. The World Bank Group has thus signaled a very strong ambition on energy access and coupling private and public sectors together to try to move and scale. How do you see IFC evolving its approach to turn this ambition into actual deployed capital and private sector investment mobilization?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us here. I think many of you have already heard my colleagues and talk about Mission 300 and what it is. I'm not going to try to summarize it now, but just to keep in mind what's the innovative part about Mission 300 from our side is trying to bring together the group companies within the World Bank Group much more closely together and start treating it like it's one balance sheet. So it's about how do we bring and how do we accelerate concessional capital that is provided to the governments. And we've committed to provide $30 billion of concessional capital by 2030 to support energy access. In addition to that, you have IFC bringing private financing to the developers, to the ones that are on the ground executing a lot of these energy access programs. IFC and MEGA have committed to providing $5 billion of long-term financing by 2030. And then the last bit, which you've already heard a few messages already around how do we do blended finance, how do we do credit enhancement, and those instruments, and that's a big part of what MEGA does. So a lot of what Mission 300 is trying to bring those things much more closely together and package them. And the reason why we're doing that is, our history has been a bit mixed in terms of when we try to treat things as projects when we're in the energy access space. It's been, as you know, very risky, very challenging in terms of small scale, small size of transactions. So what we're really trying to do is move from doing projects to doing platforms. And that was some of the acronym soup that Maud started to mention. Please don't make me what all these acronyms mean. I keep forgetting. But we have, the DARES program, which was launched in Nigeria. Just to give you an example, that was launched initially with $750 million of grants to the government of Nigeria to be available for results-based financing. To couple that, IFC came forward with $250 million of working capital funding that makes sure that the developers have a source of capital to actually order the equipment, to install the systems before they're actually eligible to receive those grants that are being passed to the government. So that's how we're trying to bring those different instruments together. Because that program has been so successful, we're actually rolling it out to 4 more countries later this year: Benin, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and the Central African Republic. So we think we're onto something in terms of some of these solutions, and we're going to continue to try to do more of that. One of the roles that IFC has within Mission 300 is also to increase the engagement that we have with private sector to make sure that we're hearing all of your concerns, all of your suggestions about what we need to elevate and escalate into the conversations we have with governments. And we've really kicked this new engagement off in the last couple of weeks. Some of you may have been contacted by my colleagues. And I just wanted to give you a little taste of what we're hearing. We've spent a lot of time working with the governments on these things called national energy compacts. And the compacts are intended to make sure that we're asking the governments to put forward their commitments as to what they're going to do from their side. We can bring the capital, but none of this works unless the government is willing to put together a credible plan that can actually be executed. It's interesting what private sector has been telling us is that they really do appreciate the compacts and what they're bringing to this discussion. But a lot of what they're seeing is we just need government to execute what they've already said that they've done. And for me, that's kind of now one of my new mottos when it comes to looking at energy access: execute, execute, execute. That's the only way we're actually going to reach any of these goals. As much as we want to come with new innovative solutions, I think a lot of it is just trying to do more of what we already have on the ground and just see if we can execute more. We think that's the way we're going to accelerate energy access, and that's where we're going to put more of our efforts. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Maybe as the Mission 300 is so important to try to move the needle with the little time that is left until 2030. Follow-up question, you mentioned execute. What are the criteria that are the most decisive for you to determine where to direct the Mission 300 resources today?
I think we're looking at it from 2 perspectives. First, within the World Bank, we're trying to make sure that we're doubling down our resources where the energy gaps are still the greatest. We've put together sort of which countries we think probably need a little bit of extra effort, because that's where we need to have enough resources to be able to reach those people that do not have access. That's part of the solution, but then I think part of it also is, part of what we have to do is make sure that we can actually support what will truly be a sustainable business plan by the private sector. So we can always help private sector to go from their pilots to small-scale businesses. We can have blended finance. But at the end of the day, if we're not helping support companies as an integrated energy approach, and this is something that David, when you mentioned about the move from RA to RA, it is about, how do we really bring in C&I and interconnected mini grids into the equation. And that's kind of the way we're now looking at where we think sustainable and credible business plans will be going. For us at IFC, we can always provide our capital, but we have to find a way to mobilize more private sector capital. For us, that means how do we get capital off the sidelines? How do we get the BlackRocks and the Brookfields and the sovereign wealth funds to want to be in this space? That is really our focus, and we're trying to see how can we support the private sector to look at a more integrated business plan going forward.
Thank you. And talking about integration, I think there is no opposition between private sector and development. Matteo, how, from your perspective, from the UNDP perspective, how does energy access fit within the priorities for Africa, and how is it reflected in the current programs and action that you are supporting on the ground?
Yes, I think, first of all, it's important to recognize that energy access is a development issue. So we're looking at it in a broader development perspective, and I think I don't need to convince that energy underpins every productivity, every development opportunity. So we really, sorry, there's a bit of an echo here. All right. So we really want to address energy as part of this broader development perspective, and that brings the interlinkages between energy access and productive use of electricity. So it's not only about, it's also about the quality of these connections and how we can ensure that by enabling energy access, we also enable minimum viable access to allow for productive use of electricity. And we do not see anymore the challenge for energy access as a technological issue. I think we're also hearing from the panel today that it's no longer an issue of resources and investment opportunity. It's no longer an issue of price, as renewable energy have now become cost competitive, but it's really an issue of risk allocation and risk distribution. So find ways to distribute those risks in a manner that allows bringing those big investors, institutional investors, into the sector. So as UNDP, we are looking to build the foundation for risk reduction. And this involves a lot of invisible work. And we have here at EIF, 17 countries coming together from our Africa Mini-Grid program, looking at how they can establish the right enabling environment to allow for these investments. So a lot of work on policy, how we can reduce those risks to policy de-risking measures. And sometimes those are simple solutions that needs political commitment and also a vision to be adopted. We're proud to share a few examples. For example, in Somalia, where last year a new regulation was adopted for licensing. So there is now a unified licensing system for a mini-grid developer and to be able to provide energy services. And this is a big step forward, and it was something that was asked by the private sector to the public sector to make sure that the rules of the game are clear. So these are the type of interventions that we are supporting that contributes also to the work that others are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mateo. De-risking, it's an important word. Edward, from the European Investment Bank perspective. So we have, since a few years, the Global Gateway Initiatives that has mobilized significant EU capital for sustainable infrastructure. How is the bank deploying instruments in the energy access space? And what kind of structures are proving the most effective? I know that there is debt grants, Desiree Capital. Can you give us a bit more info on that?
Yeah, it's working. Thank you, Maud, for the question. Indeed, we are one of the implementing partners of the Global Gateway Initiative, and we're very grateful for the support that the EU is giving the EIB to deploy our finance. Maybe to start, for the last 6 years, we are only deploying our finance into renewable energy and clean energy sources, so no longer do we finance any fossil fuels. We are active both in the public sector. I will not dwell on it, but we can either back large projects backed by the sovereign. For example, we've been backing the Olkaria geothermal expansion plants here in Kenya, or program loans. But I'll focus a bit more on the private sector, which is more relevant here. We can finance direct corporates that have clean energy projects in the continent. We can also work through intermediated loans, where we often work through local banks. And then they can on-lend then to renewable energy and energy access projects with our financing. And one of the advantages our financing has is often has much longer tenors than what's available in the local market, and also at more beneficial rates. We also back private equity, venture capital, and infrastructure funds very much these infrastructure funds are focused on building more solar plants, wind farms, and energy access projects, including mini-grids like that. Maybe one of the more interesting parts to mention is indeed through programs that we have from the EU that allow us to back projects which we would otherwise not be able to finance due to our risk criteria. They allow us to go into more high-risk projects. To give you two examples, we're currently financing 147 mini-grids being built in Madagascar, and in West Africa, in Nigeria and neighboring countries, we're also financing mini-grids being built, backed by solar PV and by biomass and other technologies. Finally, what would be interesting is, as was mentioned earlier in the speech by the ambassador, Lake Turkana wind farm was supported by us, I think, as the largest financier through a public-private partnership. It was until last year the largest wind farm in Africa, but has been overtaken in the meantime. But we're very proud to be able to come in with direct lending, indirect lending, equity, as well as with blended finance into the smaller and more high-risk projects, thanks to our support from our partner at the EU.
Thank you, Edward. With regard to blended finance, because this has been seen at one point as the magical solution, there are still some improvements to be done on the concept. From your perspective, where is this model really working, and what still needs to shift to really go to scaling?
I think it's been working well in certain areas. I think thanks to our loans and the grants from the EU, we are able to back utility-scale solar and wind projects, and we can bring in private capital thanks to de-risking these projects. We can take away or reduce off-taker risk or currency risk or political risk, and once these are mitigated to some extent, we see the private sector is more active and more appreciative to come into these projects. We've also seen it working in energy efficiency and distributed energy projects, where aggregation is a very useful tool. We are unable to go into very small projects, unfortunately, but when aggregation platforms put smaller projects together, it enables us to come in, and again, with our concessional loans, we can then unlock portfolios which would otherwise not be financed. It still falls short in a number of areas as well. For example, I think we sometimes see that the risk transfer is insufficient, so we would need either more concessional financing or maybe focus on fewer projects but give them bigger loans or bigger grants to be able to make them happen. Fragmentation, as I mentioned, is still an issue. It's really there's extensive structuring and talks going on between donors, between DFIs and governments, which make each single project quite expensive to make it happen. So, and it slows down deployment. So by aggregating them, it will help getting more projects being executed. We would also like to see a bit more stronger pipeline. There's still a lack of bankable projects. And again, here, maybe more grant and more TA money could go towards project preparation, especially in fragile and lower income markets. And finally, we also see still local market constraints on the capital markets, currency issues, as I said, and I think blending strategies alone are not sufficient to bridge the gap. So what needs to happen is, I mean, on all these issues, let me be, all these issues, we need to move the needle a little bit. Local currency solutions would have to become maybe more accessible or cheaper because they can make things sometimes too expensive. Maybe the use of guarantees, which is something we're looking into now to provide first loss guarantees, political risk mitigation guarantees, more catalytic use of concessional finance. Again, maybe focus the grants that we have on fewer projects to make sure they happen, that we can show and demonstrate the successfulness of these projects, which then hopefully brings in the private investors later. And finally, also, we really need to focus on making, kind of achieving standardization in how we finance projects and not seeing every single project as a bespoke project, which will then take a lot of time to structure, which really increases transaction cost. Putting them together, standardizing, would be much more beneficial than these one-off deals that is currently still the standard.
Thank you, Edward. And this allows me to liaise with Helene in terms of, we've heard the word aggregation and its important scaling, having de-risking tools from your point of view as an investor, because you're obviously looking at projects and platforms from a risk-return perspective. Where does the risk-return equation still fall short?
Yeah, thank you. I have pretty much the same, comments to make as yourself. The bottlenecks, and for me, the first one is definitely it's the affordability. Most of the time, affordability is like the elephant in the room, right? Because we're trying to deliver commercial returns in markets where end users oftentimes cannot pay the cost-reflective cost. So who is bridging the gap? I think this has to be between the private sector and the public one, development banks. This has to be very clearly addressed because, impact requires low prices and investors require margins. So how do we align that? The currency risk. Blended finance has helped to bridge a lot of risks, political risk, but currency is still a risk that is not being addressed enough. Most of the time, I find, especially in mini grids, we are overfunding hardware and not the demand enough. And we are very good at financing solar panels. That's easy on our charts. But much less effective at actually funding what do the end user actually do with this electricity. And I think this is one also key point and one bottleneck. I totally agree with you with the execution risk. Most of the time it's a high upfront cost but slow payback, so that's something. And the last is the fragmentation that you mentioned also. Because between developers, donors, governments, and investors, they often optimize for different outcomes. For some, it is political wins. For some, it is development. For some, it is impact metrics. And for others, it's IRR. So how do you all align on these objectives to make it happen and faster?
Thank you, Helene. Camille, from ARE's vantage point across the sector, the members that we are hearing, what does the current funding landscape looks like for the private sector driven energy access?
Yeah, thank you, Maud. Very interesting to actually come up and talk after everyone else, because we hear a lot of things and then we can actually shift from the script and try to make some comments on what has been said. But allow me to share at first a simple observation on this landscape from the perspective of the members of ARE, which is the hat I wear this morning. This is sort of a paradox. We hear a lot of promises that has never been more stated ambition and capital announced, and yet money seems to be not flowing smoothly to companies and projects. And so here is, to me, the questions that we need to ask ourselves. I do understand from a financier's perspective, donors, institutions, and so on, that we have to de-risk, that we have to work out instruments properly, that we have to go through procedures and processes. But at the end of the day, we're still very far from the objective, and we are getting very close to 2030. So the point here, and we could talk about a lot of things, but I want to paraphrase Don for what he mentioned as one of the big stakes: execute, execute, execute. And we are at the moment still struggling with the execution. I want to mention something because I do hear about aggregation and going at scale and so on, but we are still hearing from the members, from all these companies on the ground doing the work, that they're struggling, especially on the small and medium-sized tickets. We're still missing the middle, and we haven't yet found or provided answers to that. we could talk about local currency needs, we could talk about early stage financing or innovation and first of kind projects financing that could help also move forward and deliver more. But I want to emphasize the fact that money being one of the key elements, procedures and processes that lead us to huge delays at the moment are a real bottleneck. And we should keep that in mind, because I wish that one day we weren't on this stage talking about the future, like what haven't we achieved and what do we need to do to achieve those results, but the complete opposite. We would be saying, oh, we actually did it and now we're out of job. I mean, this is what we should be targeting. And money is a huge element, a huge component with everything that comes with it. But the way we spend the money, to whom we spend the money, and which ticket size, because the vast majority of our members, the vast majority of the companies doing the job on the ground are not large corporates. And most of them trying to scale on their own markets, African-led companies, in vast majority as well, do not necessarily have today the capacity to aggregate and to go at the scales that you're all looking for. Give them the time and the tools. Let's give ourselves, not you guys, but ourselves, the time and the tools to allow those companies, the vast majority of companies, to progressively go at scale, become the companies and the investees that financiers want to see, to deliver in these markets. And maybe just, I don't know if we still have a bit of time, but I think that from the ARE's perspective, I mean, we could talk about a few things, pressing gaps that we would like to see being addressed during this EIF forum or during further conversations outside of this room. I talked about the early stage working capital, the local currency. I think that we're all aligned on that point. We talked about PUE, also very important, that should come alongside all of these instruments. Something that maybe needs to be very clear. As much as we finance projects and infrastructures on the ground, don't forget that we need companies to be alive to do the job. So project funding on one side, and we have good examples of things that have been, projects that have been delivered or deals that have been made, cross-boundary, ANKA, of course I'm going to mention that, but so many others. But we do also need corporate funding to help these companies grow. We're talking amongst, I mean, ARE's members are talking about building and bridging, building platforms, joining forces and so on. Help them. We need to help them. ARE is in the need to structure and to grow. And I'm very happy that we managed to do the rebranding. ARE is now ARE. Love it. This is absolutely great. And very happy to see that we are now moving from strictly rural electrification and understanding that we need to go with a holistic approach and have an integrated vision, including CNI, grid systems, and all of the nexuses that we can build around energy. So this is very much also something that we as ARE want to see happen during this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. Talking about the bottlenecks, and we've heard about the compact, Mr. Kiva, from your perspective, having a stable environment, stable and predictable policy environment is also a very, very important factor for investors and for the operators and the developers. Can you give us a bit more on what Kenya is doing in this regard, and what are the priorities to have this enabling environment from a policy point of view?
I think indeed, yes, policy direction is very important. We make sure that we have an energy policy which takes us for 5 years. And it's not just the policy itself, but also how we develop our policies. We develop our policies through a consultative process. We consult all our development partners, we consult the private sector, we consult the citizens to make sure that the policies which are put in there are good, they're forward-looking, and then they are also implementable. Kenya, we have also been doing long-term planning. We started with the area of power planning. We have what many of you know as the least cost power plan, least cost power development plan, which is 20 years rolling plan. And we are now moving into the era of integrated energy planning, where we are now going to put not only power, but also clean cooking, energy efficiency, electricity access, and also resource mapping. Already the framework is there. We have already sent out a circular to all our county governments, because in Kenya we have two levels of government, the national and the county. We have also sent it to all the utilities to give us their plans, and then the cabinet secretary is supposed to consolidate that into an integrated national energy plan. So that becomes our plan, our investment tool in the horizon to come. But other than the long-term planning, we also look at short-term. And right now we have the medium-term, which is our energy compact. We have developed with our Mission 300 partners. And this is looking at 5 years now, I think around 4 years to come. And in it, we have put the policies, the commitments of the government, the priority projects which we want to do in the areas, just in the whole value chain, and also the facilitative role the government is going to do. And then the projects which we want to undertake, complete with a description on the amount or the capacities and the direction we want to go. And we have set up a CDMU secretariat, which is going to be unpacking these policies, the commitments, so that then we can have implementable projects. So indeed, policy, regulations, regulatory framework, having a business, a good business environment for private sector, that's where we are focusing on, and we are telling the private sector to come so that we can walk this journey together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kiva. Maybe to conclude, the main question of this panel was how to unlock investment. And I will turn to all of you to think for just a few seconds about where, when you look at the pace of progress on SDG and where we stand, what is currently getting in the way of scaling, and for each of you, what would be the single action that, if prioritized today, could make the biggest difference towards 2030? So, and I guess that would be the action plan for the coming 4 years if we put all these single actions together. Who wants to take the lead?
I don't mind starting. Let's start with convert promises into actions. We've heard a lot about promises and commitments. Let's make sure that they don't turn out to be just words, and that they eventually become actions, and sooner than later, please.
Okay, let me continue. Maybe 2 comments. I think it would be very helpful if the DFI community and the financiers would streamline their requirements. I think it must be quite difficult for smaller companies and smaller projects to deal with all of us. I know ourselves quite well, and we have a lot of requirements, but they're similar to others. But I think there's always small differences, and I think streamlining that would be very, very helpful. And maybe also looking at the other side, we do sometimes find slowness in decision taking and the capacity that some either governments or local governments have to execute fast on taking decisions, on being clear about the policy frameworks. So maybe also the governments across Africa and across the developing world, it would help really if those processes could be streamlined and decision taking could be sped up.
Thank you. Maybe I will repeat some of the elements I mentioned in my intervention, but I think there's 2 key elements. One is defining a common understanding of risk between public and private sector, and then addressing those risks through clear policy environments. So that's the call, is how we can accelerate the implementation of those policies.
If I had to come up with two points myself, I want to pick up on something Edward just said, which is development partners need to not just streamline their own processes, they need to have better coordination, right? So this is something we're trying to do under Mission 300 is actually we have a development partners coordination group. We just launched a process by which we're asking the governments to basically put up your top 3 things that's going to accelerate access in your countries. Because the funding requests, the demand for assistance is huge. We're trying to get this in front of the development partners to say, who wants to put their hand up and do these things? So that's one thing. The second thing I would suggest is we have to try to, and I come from a project finance background, I've done some really highly structured deals in my lifetime. I think this is a problem for access. The more highly structured we make these deals, the longer they take, the longer they are to adjust to the business plans, and it doesn't necessarily lead to scale. We have to simplify the financing instruments, and that's one of the reasons why, at IFC we've put together this patient equity vehicle called Zafiri, which we're going to talk about tomorrow at the mini-grids track if you want to hear more. But I think the whole point is that companies need equity on their balance sheet. They don't need highly structured sources of debt, because every lender has their bells and whistles that has to be satisfied. It gets extremely complicated for small companies. So how do we streamline the way we can get financing into the private sector? Thanks.
Yeah, so for me, we realize that innovative financing is key, blended finance, all those sustainability-linked financing, climate financing. Now, the government has done what we can for our policies. We have provided for this in our policies, in our plans. What we are asking the private partners, the private sector development partners, is to come and we walk the journey together and fix any other thing which needs to be fixed while we are working together. I think that's what we intend to, we want to propose, because public financing actually enables, but it is a private sector financing which is going to deliver. Thank you.
So on my side, I would say that in our perception, most of the options are already on the table and most of the solutions. So a lot have been tested in the past years, a lot has been elaborated, so now just keep what works and to converge with what you said with streamlining the funding to the companies. Yes, that's true for the companies, but it should be as well for all the subsidy schemes. I mean, we had RBF, which worked in certain country. Let's just duplicate them instead of trying to invent something new in order to deliver the faster we can.
On my side, as an early stage investor, I would like to jump on Camille's comment that yes, the trend is getting towards platforms, bigger players, and bigger ticket sizes, but what about all the smaller players that need to get to this maturity to aggregate? And so I think the VC and the PE should work more together, especially in the perspective of the big funds coming up. So that's my wish.
Thank you, Helene. So I will conclude maybe with 3 words, 3 verbs: streamline, simplify, and execute. And that's the action plan, I guess, for the future. So please join me in thanking our panelists for the conversation. And we'll now take a break and inaugurate the exhibition. So I encourage you to take a few minutes to visit this exhibition, go meet the entrepreneurs and the companies that are exposing, and we reconvene at 11:15. No, it's already 11:15, so I don't know when, at 12. In 20 minutes for the next high-level panel. Thank you, David.